So it doesn't matter what we do with it, as long as they're being challenged in these songs and the traditions that we have are being reimagined and reappraised for today, for the times that we live in, these uncertain times of, ecological collapse, for an uncertain future. They actually hold within them a lot of wisdom for not just relationship to the land, but relationship to each other. And I think that is most important about how music and culture and bring communities together.
Welcome, dear friends. It is a delight, as always, to share this time with you. Thank you for tuning in. We have another special live episode for you, this time coming from Wilderness Festival. After this episode, we are taking a short 2-week break to spend time with our families and out in nature. Over these weeks, you will also have a chance to catch up on recent episodes, perhaps while sitting out under the great skies. I am opening up my next round of Beautiful Leadership mentoring, which will begin late September and takes us up to the end of the year, which is a really nice time of year to work as the trees lose their leaves here in the Northern Hemisphere, and we go into this quieter, more internal time. And for those in the Southern Hemisphere, as you go into this brighter, more abundant time. The mentoring is deep one-to-one work, which connects you in more coherence to your soul, to the life that you're here to live, and gives you space to work through old patterns in a really subtle and sophisticated way. Us humans are a complex myriad of the past and the future, and the conditioning that we are shaped with in our early years really does influence so much of our words, our choices, our relationships, and our actions in the now. I have now been on my path of conscious transformation. It's not quite the right words, but it speaks to this journey and this intention and this desire to constantly grow from our experiences and to understand why we are the way that we are and to come into a deeper relationship with our truth. Not a universal truth, but to not be so impacted and affected by unhelpful cultural conditioning, ancestral conditioning, childhood conditioning, and to be able to live in a way that is more loving, more connective, more joyful, more peaceful, more open, and more sacred. During the last 15 years, I have been to so many workshops and trainings and studied with different teachers and mentors and incredible, wise wisdom keepers. This work that I share in the Beautiful Leadership mentoring, I find it to be extraordinary. It's collaborative. You have to bring your awareness, self-knowing, and devotion to it. And in this space of alchemy, I have seen the most beautiful things happen, from letting go of lifelong addictions, just like that, to completely changing the way somebody talks to themselves, which affects everything. One of the things that can happen in this space is really grounding what has been revealed in more peak spiritual or personal development experiences. It's beautiful leadership as it really opens you up to live in a more powerful and reciprocal relationship with life, and to find such sweetness in the details of your experience, and to be able to show up with more resilience and courage in life's more challenging chapters. And of course, there is an aspect that is also about how you find your path, how you contribute to the greater collective experience of this time. I work with a handful of people at a time. It's one-to-one work, but we start and end at the same time. So there's this experience for me and for you of a really powerful journey. During this time, your relationship with your daily practice, energy medicine, nature connection, unconscious patterns, and intuition gets transformed. You can book a resonance call with me anytime between now and late September, and also attend the information session that I am hosting on August the 30th. This is a special day in my culture called Raksha Bandhan, which celebrates the bond and love between sisters and brothers. And so it'll be nice to connect with many of you on that day, and there'll be space for you to ask questions as well. Sometimes I celebrate Raksha Bandhan not just with my actual siblings, but by tying Rakis onto trees, celebrating our kinship with the more than human world. For those of you coming to Medicine Festival, which we mention here, you can find me on the Saturday at 2:30 p.m. at the Resurgence bookstall, where I'll be signing my book Intuition. And you can find me on the Sunday at 6:45 p.m. at the Advaya stage, where I am part of a conversation called Unapologetic Women Stepping into Spiritual Leadership. I will also be at Heart of the Rose Festival for all the women, which is small and really potent. And that's happening in early September. I am sharing a workshop on the Friday evening on intuition and beautiful leadership, and we'll be there all weekend. And there is an amazing event happening in Bristol on the 29th of September till the 1st of October, which is the Planet Local Summit, organized by Helena Norberg Hodge from episode 22. This is going to be fantastic. I will be there on the Friday, and there are so many of our previous podcast guests that you will have the opportunity to listen to speak in person, including Charles Eisenstein, Pat McCabe, Bayo Akomolafe, Jeremy Lent, Lila June Johnson, Satish Kumar, Manish Jain, Rob Hopkins, and Alnor Ladda. I highly recommend for those of you in the UK that you take the opportunity to come and be at this event. And if you aren't sure who some of these names are, please revisit the archives of the podcast and listen to these episodes. The Planet Local Summit will be an opportunity to connect with like-minded people from 5 continents over a clear vision to change the world. There will be in-depth critique of corporate globalization and greenwashing, real-life strategies for systems change, first-hand accounts of inspiring localization initiatives from around the world, roadmaps for human and ecological well-being. And now for today's episode, which was recorded in the Forum tent at Wilderness Festival. The day was compared by Ed Gillespie from episode 59. I opened this space with a talk on intuition and a healing meditation where we cleared patterns and planted new seeds relating to the fear and the doubts that people in the audience had around their own intuition. We have shared a small clip from the talk in this podcast to bring you into the forum with us. And then we welcome back my dear friend Sam Lee from episode 128, who is a Mercury Prize nominated folk singer, writer, conservationist, song collector, award-winning promoter, broadcaster, and activist. He is the author of The Nightingale, Notes on a Songbird. Sam Lee plays a unique role in the British music scene, a highly inventive and original singer, folk song interpreter, passionate conservationist, song collector, and successful creator of live events. Alongside his organization, the Nest Collective, Sam has shaken up the music scene, breaking boundaries between folk and contemporary music and the assumed places and ways folk song is appreciated. Sam's helped develop its ecosystem, inviting in a new listenership, interrogating what the messages in these old songs hold for us today. Sam is also a founding member of the organization Music Declares Emergency, in which the UK music industry is convening to acknowledge and address how it can combat the climate and ecological crisis. In this episode called Fireside Stories, we explore the themes of wilderness, fire, and ecological collapse as we speak to the question, how do we reawaken and refoster our ancient love and connection with nature? We hope that this conversation connects you deeper to the music that lives in you and the sacred elements that we live within. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration, the spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection to new technologies, to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible.
Welcome to the forum at Wilderness. Our first speaker to open up Wilderness Forum for 2023 is a very old friend of mine, actually. So Amisha and I have known each other for, 15 years. But Amisha has been on an extraordinary journey, and I've watched as her work has unfolded beautifully over the last decade and a half. She is responsible for All That We Are podcast, if you've tuned into that. I think now 184 episodes, which anyone who's ever done a podcast of their own will know is such an enormous amount of work to create that amount of incredibly rich content. It's quite an achievement. But today she's going to be here talking about her book and her work around the subject of intuition. Now, Amisha was memorably described once as someone who has the gentle elegance and sensitivity of a butterfly, but with the acuity and sharpness of a warrior. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to put your hands together to access your inner wisdom, to tune into your instincts, and give a very warm welcome to the goddess of intuition, Amisha Gadiali.
Thank you, Ed. And I find like the best way of thinking about intuition is to understand it as a part of our intelligence. And so we have our rational intelligence and we have our intuitive intelligence. In the culture in which we live, there's a huge emphasis on our rational intelligence. And that's the main intelligence that gets developed at school when we have to call and respond information. And then there's this whole other part that we do actually use, like we use our intuition a lot, say when we're driving, and I don't know, like if a cyclone was just coming, I don't think there is one coming today, but if there was a cyclone like on its way, without even knowing that, like there'd sort of be a moment where we'd all just kind of like leap up and run. And so like that survival-based intuition is very much a part of us. And there are all kinds of incredible stories about people like leaving buildings like just before a building collapses or something like that, that we have this thing inside of us that just kind of knows. But this thing around it being part of our intelligence that actually we're being really invited to reclaim is something that I feel is really, really, really interesting, especially for these times that we live in. And what really fills me with hope is that, as we know, there's a lot of crises that we're in at the moment, from climate to the refugee crisis to the way that we've designed how we live and make money and all of this kind of stuff. And yet most of us are not using all of our intelligence because we are so focused on our rational intelligence. And so what makes me feel really, really excited is that the intelligence that we need for these times, it already exists within all of us. And all we have to do is open it. All we have to do is connect to this part of ourselves. And I'm sure you know that the reason that we are not in a strong relationship with our intuition is not accidental. I wrote a little bit about this in my book, and then I got an Amazon review that really made me laugh from somebody that said, I bought this book to read about intuition, and this woman's talking about politics. I don't care for her views on politics. So apparently he threw it in the bin after the first or second page, which made me happy as a review. You know that you're kind of in the right place when you're upsetting, angry, trolly people. But our intuition is something that we have been severed through a very, very violent history. And so the systems of oppression that our world as we know it has been formed through, from colonization to the witch hunts, racism, patriarchy, like that there have been like very, very, very violent, systematic processes that have made us scared of this part of us. And why is that? Because we're so fucking powerful. And if we knew that, we wouldn't do what a lot of us do every day. We would be living in a completely different way. And if we realize that we can all tap into this incredible intelligence, like every single one of us, and you don't have to be special. And, you know, there's a thing in our culture where, I mean, at worst, it's incredibly violent what we've done about this part of ourselves. But at best, we kind of just make it to be this really light, unimportant thing. And so, you know, we call it like woo-woo, or if something intuitive happens, we say that it's strange, or something funny happened. Like we find this way of making this intelligence small rather than honoring it with deep respect. So if there's one thing that I'd love for you to take away from this conversation, is to really remember that you are a magnificent being, and that you have access to this incredible intelligence that is way bigger than anything that you could possibly explain. And so as you develop your relationship with your intuition, as you tap deeper into this intelligence that you have, please don't belittle it by calling it strange or woo-woo or funny. But actually, if we can cultivate a really deep respect with this intelligence, then I just believe that so much is possible for us as a species. And, you know, intuition is cool now. Like everyone from, you know, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, all the rich people, they all credit their relationship with their intuition. I would suggest that it's not just a tool to make millions and billions of dollars, but like that actually it's got guidance that can help you to live a life that's more connected to your soul's path, that can show you how you can better tend to the people in your life, to the environment in which we live in, that can invite you into a much richer relationship with all of life, with the more than human world, and bring in ways of communicating and listening and learning in completely different ways. Culturally, I know that I was in this trap, and this is sort of also what we get taught so much in our education system, is like, if you have an idea, or if you come to understand something, you have to like reference 3 dead white men in order to like make it like real. And that's kind of how you validate, like through rational intelligence, something. And I really see a world where it's completely normal for you to know things that you just can't explain how you know them. And there is incredible things that happen with like morphogenic fields and fields of consciousness, where so many different people will have the same insights, the same ideas at the same time. And of course, in our dominant culture, everyone's trying to own ideas and all of that. But like, that's not really how it works as humans. It's like the information that we need for the times that we live in, it is here, it's around us, and it's just something that you have to tap into. So thank you.
Thank you, Amisha. Put a big hand and applause.
Thank you for tuning in. If you are enjoying this episode, do join our membership. For a small contribution, you can be part of our community, where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and embodiment. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, keeping the episodes full length, free and accessible for all. And you receive a number of benefits, such as monthly soul space, going deeper sessions, access to our library of workshops, and discounts on all our online and in-person experiences. Our membership is what makes us able to make this show and stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. Head to allthatweare.org/membership to find out more and join today.
I'm going to welcome back to the stage Amisha Gadiali, and she's going to be in conversation with Sam Lee. Now, Sam, you will know as a folk singer, but Sam is so much more than that. He's been a sort of archivist and gatherer and revitalizer of all sorts of traditional songs. Enough from me. Put your hands together for Amisha and Sam.
It is a delight to be here with you, Sam. I wonder if you can share what comes to you when I say, what are the futures of your wildest dreams?
What are the futures of my wildest dreams? Are you all thinking about what your futures of your wildest dreams are right now? Can we all do that collectively? For me, I'm going to focus on nature and a vision of what Britain could be like if we took responsibility and care for our natural environment, if we really gave more of a space for nature and understood the needs and our needs of nature as well as nature's needs of us, and to create a thriving, biodiverse place where we had a society that was integrated, connected, understanding, devoted to and practicing in our relationship with nature. That's what a kind of glorious future for me would look like of my life and everyone else's. And we all had accessibility to it. Every person in this country had equal right, equal accessibility, and the permission to be in the land, to experience nature at nature's most profound.
Thank you. And it's important, the bit that you added at the end, because in this country, nature's not super accessible. We've just had a powerful win for humans and nature, which was the Right to Roam campaign. And people are now allowed to wild camp on Dartmoor again in Devon. And what's really strange about this is that it's the only place in England that you are allowed to camp and out in nature, which isn't that wild? Isn't that wild? or not wild, maybe.
Yeah, it's been an extraordinary year in many ways. How many of you are aware of the Dartmoor campaign and legal situation? Oh, good, quite a lot of you. Just to explain, I'm one of the kind of founder members of the Right to Roam group. In some ways, we've had one of the greatest PR experiences that one could possibly ask for, which was Mr. Darwell, a very, very wealthy landowner in Dartmoor National Park, who took the national park to court challenging this legal right that was written many, many decades ago, saying that we had the right to recreation on the land, and that thus included, by implication, wild camping. And he said, actually, it doesn't say wild camping, so wild camping is not allowed. Now, this idea that there is nowhere in England that one is allowed to go and sleep out under the stars anywhere except Dartmoor is phenomenal, that we have this one little tiny area. The fact that a wealthy man was able financially to go to the courts and have that overturned is even more extraordinary. And the National Park challenged that, and it was over in the appeal court. It was overruled. He may yet take it to the high courts, but so far it's now we've had 6 months of not being legally allowed to, and now it's back. And it's been an incredible awareness raising campaign, because most people didn't realize you could wild camp anywhere. Most people don't even understand what the complex rules of permissions we have of right to roam, or the lack of right to roam, as they do in Scotland, which managed to get it back some decades ago. So the campaign for getting the laws changed in England, which the Labour government have now agreed to have part of their policy to give the English the right to roam, which means that when your ticket runs out at Monday at 10 a.m. and you're kicked out of the Cornbury estate or wherever we are, it means actually you don't have to leave, because we have permissive right to roam technically. I mean, let's not go into that complex minefield. But,
we're not going to be invited back to wilderness now.
But it really does change what it means to have accessibility to nature, which we don't, because we've had, as you can see, I'm quite passionate about this subject. And as a great nature lover and as a campaigner for conservation of nature, not the preservation, the conservation of nature, access to land and our ability to be out and really kind of, sit with an oak tree whenever we damn like. and really have a connection to, and not to have this kind of set of permissions that we've paid our entry, or we've had to ask somebody, that we have an actual right to go where we like, to swim in a river, to sleep out on beautiful summer nights under the stars, and to really kind of do what we want to do with respect. Is such a fundamental part of what being human is, and is layered up with so much complexity of what our culture has arrived at through land laws and enclosure acts and brutal history of suppression of the commons. So I feel like there's a great future for us recalibrating actually, where are we at? Why is the environmental crisis so bad right now? Why are we in a place where we are so divorced from nature? And what is that effect on us? What's that led us to become as a society?
Yeah, I mean, camping at festivals and going to campsites is amazing. And there's facilities and entertainment and all of that. But it's such a different experience from being out in the wild and being in more of a vision quest kind of dynamic with nature around us, and not making a lot of noise and getting to fully see the stars. And it's one of those things with like life in England, where there are like things like this that are just not accessible. So unless you own a lot of land and you have an estate that you can go and sleep under the trees in, that somebody has to let you onto their land in order for you to have a night with the stars and a night under the trees.
It's really interesting because this is something I love sleeping out. I love wild camping, and not just in Dartmoor. I love the time that I get to have in nature with people as well. It's not just a solitary thing. I love being with friends, but I speak about it as though everybody else would like this, that we all were able to do it. And actually, it's not necessarily the case. It might also be that people are like, God, if I want to go out into nature, I want to be on, a paved path. And there's questions of like, how have we arrived at this place where some people, this idea of transgression, like walking onto the grass is such a terrifying thing. And for me, the work actually is not just about ourselves. It's also about the next generation, about children, of how important a playground, a classroom that nature is. It's been the place where societally, humanity has evolved for children exploring, learning about risk and danger and questioning, learning to question. It's the absolute crucible of curiosity is the natural world, and children don't have access to it. It's the hardest thing, unless they're lucky that parents will take them out, jump over fences, go on public footpaths, go and do that hard work, have cars to do that. It's severed at a young age. So I think there's a lot of questioning about how do we start from the youth? It's about the generations to come. How do we as adults as well start to reawaken and refoster those connections, to start to look at actually what deprivation have we got from it. Some of us are very lucky. I was very lucky to grow up on a children's charity as a kid and sent off camping. And it broke away from the Scouts in the 1920s and was a very left-wing, very kind of progressive charity, which I was really lucky to find, called Forest School Camps, not Forest School, but Forest School Camps. And it had a very kind of transgressive nature to it that instilled this kind of this spirit of rebellion. And it was kids from all over the country, city and rural kids. And I was very lucky to get that dipped in the cauldron from a young age. But I realized what a blessing that was for me to be able to kind of see, to, as I would call it, render the fence transparent, to see the land as though I had permission, and how much we are so kind of held back by this idea of can't do that, not allowed, will we get in trouble? Actually, it's only a civil law that holds us from trespassing. It's not a criminal act yet, though the Tory government tried to make trespass a criminal act and it got thrown out in the House of Lords. So we were quite close to actually losing that little kind of grey area of not permission, but where we, as long as the landowner finds your name and address, can you be taken to a court? It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And landowners will use a lot of force, as we are seeing now, to forbid people from, being on their land.
As you're speaking, and we're talking about the political barriers to spending time in nature, and that sense of, okay, I'll get into trouble, or, I could get shot or something, that kind of fear. And that's only one of the barriers, because most people didn't have great access to nature growing up. Then there's all the kind of the fear of nature itself. What's alive for you, and how can we kind of work through that fear in order to come into a relationship that is beautiful?
It's a good word, fear, and I'm not sure that there are so many words that describe the resistances we have and the confrontations. I think alienation is probably a word that captures it, that sense of disenfranchisement or estrangement, that when we go out into a place of nature, do we know what is oak tree or sweet chestnut or maple tree? Do we have that awareness of where we are? And a lot of us don't, because we don't have a culture or a curriculum that teaches us the bird song, that, you know, ubiquitous sound that everyone gets to hear, of the blackbird, the wren, the robin, the song thrush, you know, the key singers, the starlings, and if you're lucky, a nightingale, if you're lucky, curlew. We don't have any awareness of who those birds are. Some of us do. I don't speak for everyone here. And if you do, you've had a lucky start. We don't know the names of plants and the mushrooms that are growing along some of the Harris fencing here, because we've lost that tradition of passing on the knowledge. Unlike Europe and Scandinavia, particularly, that have an immensely robust passage of handing on those awarenesses there. I've forgotten the Norwegian word for the kind of right to sleep out, the permission they have. It's a wonderful Swedish word, Norwegian word. But we don't have that. So what we see, where we confront it, it's just all green. That's for me, a real impoverishment that we have, of not being able to have a befriending of our natural world and be able to exercise some of the amazing ways that humans connect with nature. And you spend time with any tribal or indigenous community, of which I've had the great privilege of doing so by nature of my work as a musician, as a song collector, and start to see how that relationality occurs within communities who depend much more kind of on a day-to-day basis on that, you know, profundity and that providing of nature. That there is it's close in a very spiritual way, in a devotional way. Their songs, as I think our folk songs do. I'm a folk singer, and my journey of discovering folk music from when I was a young man with that guy Joe over there, you know, singing folk songs. Hey Joe, you know, we first sang our folk songs together, and my journey is realizing how much our folk traditions and repertoire in this country, of which we have hundreds of thousands of folk songs, are the remnants, in many ways, you know, beautiful, intact remnants of a very ancient indigenous British Isles set of songs that recognize our love, our dependence, and our appreciation of nature, and our kind of common awareness that when a folk song speaks about the turtle dove or the nightingale or the lark, there's an implicit knowledge within that from the singers of old, those old singers that I managed to meet, some of the last ones who sang within the oral tradition, who in their singing of those birds and of the great oak trees and of our, you know, our moorlands and our chalk downlands or our great rivers, that what they're singing about is an ancient love and connection. As I was saying, it has been kind of eroded by, you know, through policy and land right issues, but still within the songs holds this extraordinary sense of awareness of who we are on the land, what the land needs of us. And so I've realized that actually our folk songs are our devotional. They're our sacred songs of this land. They don't have a sacredness within them that we'd understand as a sort of, you know, a holy one, but actually they replicate exactly the same practice that the mantras and the devotional and the rags sing of, you know, the sunset and the sunrise, or if you go for instance, into the Amazon from the indigenous communities of Brazil or Colombia, you start listening to their songs, and they're all about loving of a particular river or of a tree. And you translate them, and it's a little bit like that folk song from Norfolk. And you realize actually we have it within our culture of that sense of and music is such a wonderful way of connecting. It always has been. These are our prayers, essentially.
The songs that you've collected, as well as being devotional to the land, do they also teach us about the plants and the birds and the rivers?
Yeah, so it's really lovely being asked that, because I kind of go back through the songs. So I was a song collector. I don't work in that practice anymore. But for about 15 years, since 2005, I was very lucky to be apprenticed to a Scottish traveller who was one of the last of that ancient line of ballad singers and storytellers. And as him and his community were born in tents, barefooted till they were teenagers, lived on the land. They were essentially our indigenous people. And Stanley Robertson took me on as his the keeper of the law of that family's traditions. And I then, from that work with him after he passed in 2009, I had 4 years with him, went out to try and find some of the last singers and keepers of old law amongst the gypsy traveller communities. That's the Irish travellers, English gypsies, and Scottish travellers. I travelled all around the whole of Ireland and England and Scotland into traveller sites, traveller camps, meeting the elders. And these were, men and women, mostly over the age of around 75, but often in their 80s, sometimes in their 90s. None of them could read or write, but the most articulate, photographic memory, keepers of enormous amounts of knowledge. And they had grown up living around campfires, cooking their food, living off the land, taking food from the land with respect. And lots of those songs speak so phenomenally about that sense of respect and the honor, the honorable contract. We call it the honorable harvest. It's an American term about this idea of taking what you need and no more. And so many of those songs, sometimes explicitly and always implicitly, hold this sense of the contract of what that exchange is, and also within some of them, extraordinary knowledge of plants, often on a very mythic level. Some phenomenal songs. We've talked about the willow tree that has many songs of the mythological power of the potency of the willow tree, of how that goes back to pre-biblical times, but also with, of course, many of us know now that aspirin comes from salicylic acid, comes from the willow tree, so it's had this curative, powerful, pain-relieving properties. And that's kind of woven into many of the folk songs that speak about this. All around my hat, I shall wear the green willow. And there's amazing songs. There's a wonderful song that I'm thinking of, not far from here, only about 30 miles, was a man called Wiggy Smith. Romany gypsy, was a bare-knuckle boxer, fighter. Apparently as great a boxer as he was a ballad singer. And he has this song called, it comes from Hares on the Old Plantation. It's a hare poaching song. And in this song, he speaks about the laying to sleep, the pussycat, it's the old name for the hare, out poaching with his dog and his gun. And just this kind of way of releasing the spirit of the hare as he is taking the life. And it's kind of, you see that within the Sand people in the Kalahari. When they kill an arrow, they're still bow hunters. And I went hunting with them. And when they kill an animal with arrow, which takes 2 days of tracking and finding, it's not a quick thing. But once the animal has been shot and they find it, if the animal is still alive, as they take the life, they breathe out the life of this animal as a kind of releasing of the spirit. And I realized we have that exact same practices here on this land, and there it is within our songs. And you know that when the hare is caught, its kind of neck is wrung, or its mallet is taken over the head and it's thrown in the bag, but there's that sense of gratitude. I think the word is gratitude here, that we've lost that sense of thankfulness for where our food comes from and what has happened for us to receive. And that's a whole thing that's so within the folk songs about that sense of appreciation and gratitude and thanksgiving, which perhaps also we all need to practice a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something that you've mentioned a few times, which is the last. And I wonder what has happened within these oral song traditions and why are the traditions not continuing? I mean, of course, you have done your part in collecting songs and bringing songs back into different contexts, but why have those traditions not continued?
There's always this challenge of actually the traditions do carry on, and there is a passage, and these things are not lost forever. I think what I was very interested in was this idea of the intangible cultural heritage, the oral traditions that have been unbroken, passed from mother to son, father to daughter, grandparent to grandchild, in that sense of never written down, just absorbed through the families. And this is songs that go back for hundreds of years and thousands of years. There's songs I've collected that are over 2,000 years old. We've lost that time of oral tradition. I remember speaking to an Irish traveller once about when did the singing stop? And this old boy who lived in South Wales, and he was probably in his mid-80s, Cassidy family, Irish traveller man. He says, it was like, I tell you, the day the singing stopped, I could tell you the day. It was a really bad Irish accent. I shan't do it. It was summer 1974. It's like, wow, how can you date the day that the culture died? He goes, the day that Woolworths started selling the portable televisions. And at that moment, they were brought into the caravans and everyone stopped listening to the old folk. And that was it. It was a hard line. They switched the television on, suddenly had the technology, came into the caravan, and nobody sat around the fire and was interested in the old people. And that was it. Anybody who was over the age of about 10 or 11 at that time had drunk enough from those old people to have got the songs inside, enough of the songs inside them that when I came, how many years, 40 years later, they're in their 70s and 80s, and they hadn't sung those songs since they were 10-year-olds. They'd be in there. So they were remembering songs that they hadn't thought about for that many decades. So this idea of the age of extinction that we live in, both ecological extinction but also cultural extinction, is that we see on every funeral is another keeper of old knowledge is passing on that necessarily has, in many cases, hasn't really been inherited. There are loads of exceptions to this. And the funny thing is, and it goes with the Cassidy family, that I went to visit a man called the Buffalo. And the Buffalo Connors was one of the greatest singers I ever met. He was an Irish traveller, lived at Enniscorthy in Southeast. And I recorded over 300 songs from this man, one of the great ballad singers. Never had been recorded, nobody ever knew, but he was known as this kind of phenomenal song carrier by the community. And I never got all his songs. And I went to visit him 3 times in his life. And when I went back on the 4th time, he'd passed away. And his wife was there, and old Lil. And if you want to go and hear, Lil is one of the most beautiful things you'll ever hear. And I've got films of her on the songcollectors.org website and on YouTube. Just have to look, Song Collectors. And a lot of the singers that I recorded and collected we put on YouTube, and particularly on YouTube because when the granddaughter, we were sitting there talking about the Buffalo, lamenting his passing and recounting his songs and what an amazing man he was. When I asked the granddaughter, who was a Cassidy, the Connors had married into the Cassidys, and they had this granddaughter. And the Cassidys, my God, the voices on the Cassidy family, there was not one of them couldn't sing better than Adele. They were phenomenal singers. And the Connors were the song character. They had the repertoire. The Connors had the repertoire, but they didn't have quite the same voice. So when they married, they had this granddaughter. She'd taken the Cassidy name, and she was staying with the family. And I asked her, have you learned any songs of your grandfather? And she goes, yeah, I have actually. And then she started singing The Outlandish Night. This is like ballad number 132, like about 1,200 years old, ancient song, massive song. It's one of the ones I learned from the family. I'm not going to sing it for you. Don't worry, we'll be here till evening. It takes about 15 minutes to sing this song. And it's supposed to have come back from the Crusades, from an old kind of Arabian tale about a woman that outwits this rapist. It's about a man who tries to rape and murder this young girl, promises he'll marry her. And he's killed 7 women before, and she outwits him and throws him into the ocean and drowns him. And it's this wonderful song about female empowerment. And there she starts singing The Outlandish Night. I couldn't believe this like unbelievably rare ballad. And she sings this song like with this voice. And I go to her, wait, did you learn that from your grandfather? She goes, yeah, I did. She goes, did he teach it to you? And she goes, no, I learned it from watching the YouTube of him upstairs in my bedroom. Wow. He's sitting down below in the living room all day. And she wouldn't learn it from him. She learned it from the YouTube film of him singing it. And it's like, okay. This is where it passes on. This is our great, cultural store, youtube.com.
Wow.
So we are losing culture, but we're also making it at the same time. And in some ways, we live in an amazing place where we go into other issues about what does perseverance of this material. I'm a great believer in, I'll just share this and say no more, but Gustav Mahler has this wonderful quote that's been a real kind of, for me, a mantra for how I work as an artist, as somebody who works with these songs to compose, to arrange from them. I'm playing at 3 p.m. at the Atrium with my band, and you'll hear many of these songs reinterpreted. For me, Gustav Mahler said it best, tradition is tending the flame and not worshipping the ashes. So it doesn't matter what we do with it, as long as they're being challenged in these songs and the traditions that we have are being reimagined and reappraised for today, for the times that we live in, these uncertain times of, ecological collapse, for an uncertain future, they actually hold within them a lot of wisdom for not just relationship to the land, but relationship to each other. And I think that is most important about how music and culture and community bring communities together. Festivals are a wonderful example of where that can be done really beautifully, about resilience building.
Absolutely. I have lots of fond memories of being gathered around fires with you and with music and birdsong and how special it is to be around a fire and to be with our voices. And when we all join in, and how much of an act of life that has been throughout cultures, throughout the world, throughout time. It is something that we have lost in a kind of in our dominant culture, and it's really beautiful that there are so many like pockets of reclamation of this.
Yeah, I was going to ask Amisha, for you, where are the ones that for you are most powerful, and where you've seen that sense of unity occurring that has most inspired you?
Of sitting around a fire.
Sitting around fires, but also where people have come together and felt that they are part of something greater than the sum of the parts, I guess.
Medicine Festival do it really, really beautifully. And there's a community that's been behind Medicine Festival that I've been part of for 10 years or so, where 100 of us would gather around fires and we would do lots of ceremonies around fires and sing around fires. And as that community evolved into what is now a decent sized festival, that has been kept and expanded. And so they have an area called the Sacred Glade, where they have a fire and they will have beautiful musicians. You've sung around that fire, Nessie Gomez, lots of other beautiful artists. At Solstice this year, we were gathered around that fire with incredible musicians. And I was just thinking how extraordinary it is that within this community that I'm part of, like this has now become so much part of our culture, and it's expanded, and that people are invited to come in, and not just, for the solstice on the land at Wazing, they had this beautiful celebration where there was music on a big stage, and then later on at night, an invitation to gather around the fire, hundreds of people around a fire with music. And I just had a moment of just feeling like, this is so special that this is part of our community culture.
Yeah. It's really interesting because fire's obviously big in our news feeds, and it's called the Sacred Glade, the Sacred Fire. And it's really interesting because I feel very strongly that the desacralizing of fire has been a big part of where we're at, about how we've lost our reverence and our servitude of fire and our respect for it. And in many ways, how it's coming back now to kind of haunt us in what we've done in terms of a lot of the landscape where we're seeing wildfires is land that would have been regularly feeling wildfire, but it would have been tended by humans, certainly in British Columbia, in the forest there in North America, and how much we've stepped away from that practice of controlled burning, which has now resulted in an enormous buildup of tinder coupled with massive heat wave and that sort of thing, that we're actually seeing kind of untethered and dangerous fire and aggressive fire, where we used to have fire in our life everywhere, and it was part of what kept the natural order. So I think our coming back to fireside is I always think fire is the most powerful convener. I like nothing more than sitting around the flames with friends, singing songs. Actually, if any of you at Medicine, we're holding a whole kind of British traditions area there around the fire, singing with folk songs and storytellers from the British Isles. And for me, that's something so... I mean, how many people here regularly sit around fires and used to have it as part of your kind of social life? It could be indoor fires. It doesn't just have to be outdoor fires. I mean, it's, there is nothing like it. It's the best television channel, I think.
Absolutely. And you gather a lot of people around fires. Has anyone here been to Sing with the Nightingales with Sam? That's an extraordinary experience where the nightingales are obviously a really beautiful part of it that everyone comes for, but actually the whole evening is being together, being around the fire, and being in community and song and sharing food, and that kind of how that opens you up ready to then to be with the nightingales.
This sounds like, what the hell is she on about? What is this weird thing? So I'll just give a bit of context. I don't know if anybody has ever heard a nightingale sing. I know there are a few in Oxfordshire. Has anyone can say, I've heard a nightingale?
Ed has.
Ed has, yeah. He lives in Norfolk. They have a few nightingales there. So it's a concert series. We do 40 shows over 7 weeks from mid-April to end of May. It's when the male nightingales are doing their courtship song. There's this extraordinary phenomenon when they sing, which is after dark, hence the name Nachtigall, the night wind, the night voice. The males will sing from about 11 p.m. to try and court the females, and it's this amazing, display that they do with this virtuosic song. It's the most kind of expensive and prolific and complex song within the bird world, but they're also improvisers. And when they hear human musicians, they will collaborate. So a violinist or a singer or a cellist or a oud player or a santur player can sit right on, the bird will be where those lights are, as close to us as that. And we will sit 40 of us in a circle underneath the bird and play music, and the bird will acknowledge us and respond musically. And it's this, I think the word for me is it's a ceremony. It's in the dark, and we go into this extraordinary correspondence with a wild animal in musical improvisation. And it's not, I haven't invented this idea. It's something that's been practiced for thousands of years across the Northern Hemisphere. But I've created a sort of occasion where audiences are able to come and go into that story time and listen to the narratives that we have. It's the bird that is most prolific within our folk repertoire, but also within our traditional stories and our sort of, it's a real harbinger of the spring, but also a bird that sings to our ancient ancestors in this country as being this kind of bird of love, bird of great beauty, of melancholy. Every poet there has ever been has written about the nightingale. Nightingales are our greatest muse, I'd say, in this country in that way. Yet nobody's heard a nightingale. No one knows what they sound like. They're going extinct. They'll be gone from this country in about 35, 40 years. It could possibly be sooner. It's a song that soon will go silent, like our folk songs from the land. So for me, this is an act of rebellion in that sense, about reuniting our relationship with a wild animal, but also the permission that we have to go out into nature at night and be in correspondence and be in communion. It's called Sing with Nightingales. I'd love you all to come along. We'll be putting tickets for next year back on sale in September. And we have every night, we have a different musician, and it's generally musicians who play acoustic instruments, unamplified in that sense. But it's amazing how many artists are actually going back to birdsong now and using birdsong as the pivot for inspiration, as the muse for composition, about looking, as once were, all composers, classical composers, did a piece at some point in their life in celebration of birdsong. You look at, Vaughan Williams, our great song collector and composer, The Lark Ascending, one of our most popular pieces. And I think there's a reclamation of that appreciation of birdsong. And I think maybe the COVID lockdown did wonderful things for opening people's ears, but patience and ability to hear birdsong and actually notice it. And the more that comes into popular culture, the better. Yeah. Oh, question over there. Are we going into questions now?
We weren't going to yet, but why not?
Just wanted to ask, why is the nightingale's existence so threatened, and why would it disappear in the next 30 years?
The answer that the RSPB will give is that we are losing habitat, mostly. We have a crash of insect population. The nature of our intensive agriculture means the scrub wasteland that they depend on, or the coppice woodland, is disappearing, much because of intensive agriculture, but also because of deer populations that are intensively browsing. We have ballooning, as they say, populations of deer. No one's predating, or nothing is predating deer. So they are eating back so much of the lower growth that creates the sort of habitat that songbirds, the ground nesting songbirds like nightingales and others, depend on. Pesticide use has destroyed a lot of the insect population that they depend on. But the bigger reason is global heating. And I think the thing is, they're a migratory bird. They live in sub-Saharan Africa. And what we're seeing at the moment is also increase in agriculture, and also the heat that is being experienced in our wintertime is destroying that habitat so viciously that they are not being able to take on enough food in the wintertime to make that massive migratory route. They also feed on their way in North Africa, Spain, and France. And we've had a massive collapse in the English cuckoo. The Welsh and Scottish cuckoos have been fine. I use the cuckoo as the example because they need to feed on their way through Spain. And it's the English cuckoos who migrate through Spain and France, opposed to the Welsh and Scottish ones that go through Italy, which hasn't experienced the same arid conditions, and they're not getting enough food. So a lot of the English cuckoos are dying en route. They're not making the journey back. And what we're going to see is that only gets worse, as we're seeing every summer more and more records breaking. That's going to result in absolute habitat collapse and thus migratory species. It's not going to be a small disappearances. We're seeing a small decline year on year of the birds. At that rate, what it's going to be is 1 year that's going to be so bad that we're going to go to areas where nightingales have been prolific and there simply none will have returned. So we'll see, as I call it, this kind of alopecia, this just disappearance of entire populations from areas. So that's what I think scientifically is going to happen in terms of collapse of species like that. And it won't just be nightingales, it'll be our other migratory birds, black caps and others. It's a dreaded future we're facing in that sense, which is why I say, love it now, drink as much of it as we can, because, it'll be a rude awakening when we go into the places we thought there was lots. That idea of the shifting baseline is going to start to drop very fast of like what we do get to experience in our lifetimes.
We started the conversation talking about how important it is to spend more time in nature and to form a loving, respectful relationship with nature, and then talking about the fires and how much actually having a sacred, respectful relationship with fire is also part of being able to spend more time in nature, especially in this climate. I was just remembering that a friend from Croatia was telling me that in the summer, they have loads of really awful fires because mostly English people leave like glass bottles out at campsites. And because it's so hot, the glass bottles actually start fires, and she was kind of saying it's always the English tourists that do it. And somehow we're missing this whole piece of education around the sacredness of fire. And as you were asking me about fires, and fires that I've been around, I remembered this moment when I curated this gathering and we hosted a Mongolian shaman, and she did this incredible fire ceremony, like nothing I'd ever experienced. And then towards the end, she said, who's organized this gathering? And so me and the other gentleman put our hands up, and she was like, come here. And she actually made us lick a sword that had been on the fire. And one of those moments where you're like, okay, it's taking things too far here. But she was like, this is a ritual that you're being invited in, and once you have done this, you will not be able to lie. Like, you will be a truth teller. And she said, don't worry, you won't get burned. And of course we didn't. And it's like, how is that even possible, that you can come into such a sacred relationship with the fire, that you can have experiences like that? And a couple of weeks ago, I did a fire walk across hot coals. I've done 3 in my life. And again, it's this amazing thing where you can actually come into a relationship with the fire that's so deeply respectful that you can have this experience that's extremely empowering. Don't try it at home. Likewise with the sword, you definitely need a Mongolian shaman as part of that. But the thing that I wanted to illustrate with that is that having a relationship with nature is having a relationship with all of the elements that is so deeply respectful and devotional.
Yeah, I quite agree. You look at the way we treat our water in this country, and it's really coming to the front about our abuse of our rivers, that are our life source. There's this old saying that you want to see the health of the nation, you look at their rivers, and we're in catastrophic place with our water sources. And also, with fire. I mean, I think fire is one of those things, it's like, there's such a beautiful art to how one tends to fire, how one creates fire, the practice of laying and looking after and keeping fire. And Medicine Festival we were talking about has wonderful, there are fires all over the site, and there's always somebody who's there who's building and nurturing and caring for fire. And when you start to look at the kind of symbolic practice within that, there is so much wisdom in working with fire. And I live for those nights that I get to spend, with people or on my own, just working with fire. And actually what a place of insight one can have for looking at an element like that, just working with one element. It's so easy to learn these things. And actually you take care of fire, fire takes care of you. We depend on it, and we will depend on it more and more. In energy crises, who, didn't get a wood-burning stove going a little bit more last winter? I certainly did. I lived around my fire. I'm very grateful for it. So I think we need to start to honor these elements, harness the wind, look after our earth, clean up our rivers, light more fires. That'd be my advice.
Is there one final question?
You spoke about the connection between the recovered folk music and traditions and how they connect us to ancient truths, things that were important then, are important now, maybe we've forgotten. So just to be contrary, what are the truths of our current culture that should be being preserved in a similar way for future generations?
The truths of our current culture that should be preserved. I mean, everything is preserved. That's the nature. Everything is recorded and documented. We will have this digital imprint. What needs to be conserved, as in kind of, creating a fertile place. In the broader sense of culture, for me, I'm going to go back to children and about where there are opportunities for music within schools, creativity, that needs to be preserved. The permission to be creative, I think that needs to be enforced as a right for everybody to have, to use their imaginations, to be playful. I think nature's a wonderful place for that, as I was saying earlier. But I think I'm sort of bending the question a little bit here myself. Misha, have you got an answer to that?
Well, we can add in intuition into there.
Absolutely.
What
Yeah.
I'm really asking is what do we do well
What do we do well in this country?
in the world, in our current culture?
Yeah. Creating excitement. Creating is irresistibility. It's a word that I'm really fascinated. How I came out of 7 weeks of nightingales every night sitting around the fire, and my detoxification was go to the Beyonce concert. And it was one of the greatest nights of my whole life. And what a incredible spectacle. And it was like, oh my God, the world of commercial pop is phenomenal. The things that we are able to create, the sense of occasion is so magnificent. Why can't we create that as well in the natural world, or create that same sense of, just obsessionality and devotionality we have to Beyonce, to that oak tree over there, or the oak tree on our street that doesn't have a preservation order on it and is about to be cut down by some lousy council. How do we create that same sense of protection?
I feel like one of the things that humans do really well in the world is look after each other in challenging situations. I know, like, in dominant Western, more wealthy culture, we perhaps don't do that as well. But if we're to look at humans around the world, the ways in which we are so resourceful and that we do take care of each other despite the insane situations that we live amongst, the policies that we live around, the amount of hunger that there is in the world, the amount of habitats that climate's affecting, that ability to rally together. Of course, the British political take on the refugee crisis is just ghastly. But I do feel that as humans, that sense of resilience and community is there, and it is in us. And that is our natural way of being.
Quite agree.
Well, thank you so much for coming and listening and being part of this conversation. And yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Amisha.
Thank you for listening. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community, which we would love for you to join. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. You choose what you contribute based on our sliding scale, and you become a patron whose support makes this podcast happen, as well as receiving access to a library of many resources and invitations to nourishing events. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others can find us. This podcast is made by an all-female global team. Me, Amisha Gadiali, producer and host, Annegret Afolderbach, who crafts the words that accompany each episode, and Mary Chan, who edits the sound so skillfully. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors, and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.